A 6-week-old German shepherd fought through the snow, but kept looking back up the mountain. When a former Navy SEAL lifted her, the mother appeared, then turned and asked him to follow. She led him to an empty lodge, 2 waiting puppies, and a brass bell in the dark. On the wall hung 12 winter roots. 4 doors had not been checked after the storm. By sunrise, those homes could lose power, with no promise that anyone would come. To reach them, he would have to learn that strength did not mean carrying everything alone. Where are you watching from today? Stay with us until the end and tell us what this story means to you. Please like, share, and subscribe as we work toward welcoming our first 1,000 subscribers. The storm had spent itself before noon, leaving Bluebird Ridge under a sky so pale and clean it made every shadow look blue. Snow rested on the roofs in smooth white folds. It clung to the pines above town and filled the spaces between fence posts. Along the main road, plow blades had pushed it into high banks that glittered whenever the winter sun broke through. Micah Danner watched the light move across the windshield of his truck as he drove downhill from his repair shop. He needed groceries, a new drive belt for a customer's snowblower, and nothing else. That was how Micah preferred his errands, defined at the beginning, completed in order, with no reason to speak longer than necessary. At 52, he still carried the solid frame of the Navy SEAL he had once been, though years of lifting engines and working beneath machines had added a mechanic's heaviness to his shoulders and forearms. His olive combat shirt showed beneath an open work jacket, its faded camouflage sleeves marked by 2 reinforced bands at each upper arm. Gray had spread through both temples of his swept-back brown hair. His right shoulder began to ache before he reached the first curve. Micah adjusted his grip on the steering wheel and ignored it. 5 years earlier, his former wife had told him that ignoring pain was not the same as mastering it. He had answered that some things stopped being useful once they were spoken aloud. The marriage had ended 6 months later. Since then, Micah had grown skilled at keeping his days small enough that nothing unexpected could enter them. He was approaching the bend below Kestrel House when something dark moved near the snowbank. Micah eased off the accelerator. At first he thought it was a fallen branch turning beneath the runoff. Then a small head lifted above the edge of the ditch. He pulled onto the shoulder. A German shepherd puppy stood belly deep in soft snow, trying to climb toward the road. Its front paws reached the crust, broke through, and disappeared again. The puppy slid backward, paused, and tried once more. Micah shut off the engine. For several seconds, he remained behind the wheel. There were practical possibilities. The puppy belonged to a nearby property. Its owner might already be looking. Picking it up could make the search harder. Then the puppy stopped struggling and looked directly at the truck. Its coat was wet along the belly and legs, but the animal was alert. One ear stood partway upright, the other folded sideways. A patch of dark fur climbed unevenly above its right front paw like a crooked little boot. The puppy looked at Micah. Then it turned its head toward the road leading uphill. It did the same thing twice more. Micah stepped out. Cold air entered through the open front of his jacket. His work boots sank several inches into the snow beside the ditch. "Easy," he said. The puppy did not run. It lowered its body but kept watching him. Micah stopped several feet away and crouched. The movement sent a sharp pull through his right shoulder. He rested that forearm across his knee and extended his hand. The puppy took one uncertain step. Its nose worked quickly. It came close enough to examine his glove, then stopped before touching it. Micah waited. He had worked around military dogs years ago. Not as a handler, though he had known enough handlers to understand that impatience was usually a confession. A man reached too soon because he needed the animal to trust him before he had earned it. The puppy glanced uphill again. "You've got somewhere in mind," Micah murmured. He switched hands. When he extended his left hand, The puppy leaned forward and touched its nose to the knuckles. Micah removed his canvas jacket and spread it across the snow between them. The puppy sniffed the sleeve, planted both front paws on the fabric, and pulled itself free of the ditch. It stood there, trembling, not from panic, but from cold and effort. Micah slid his left arm beneath its chest. The puppy stiffened when he lifted it. A second later, it pressed against the olive fabric of his shirt and hooked one paw over his collar. "You're too young to be making plans alone." The words left him before he could decide whether he believed them only about the dog. He carried the puppy to the truck and placed it on the passenger seat atop the jacket. It immediately caught one of the jacket's drawcords between its teeth. Micah watched it pull backward with solemn determination. "Nell," he said. The name came from nowhere he could identify. The puppy released the cord and sneezed. "It's temporary." Nell bit the cord again. Micah closed the passenger door. A shape moved between the pines above the road. An adult German shepherd came down the slope at a controlled run. Micah stepped away from the truck, leaving his hands visible. The shepherd was female, lean but strong, with golden fur beneath a black saddle. A dark mask covered her face unevenly, heavier along the right side of her muzzle. Her ears stood high, though the right one angled slightly outward as she listened. She came within a few feet of the passenger door and stopped. Inside, Nell gave a small cry. The older dog stared through the glass. Micah expected scratching, barking, perhaps a warning growl. He prepared to open the door and return the puppy. But the shepherd did none of those things. She smelled the tires. She walked once around the front of the truck. Then she returned to the passenger side and looked at Nell again. Nell stood with her front paws against the door panel. For one quiet moment, mother and puppy watched each other through the window. Then the older shepherd turned away. She walked up the road. After 10 yards, she stopped and looked back at Micah. He frowned. The dog took several more steps, then looked back again. "That's not how this is supposed to work." The shepherd waited. Micah opened the passenger door and lifted Nell down. The puppy squirmed until her paws touched the snow, then hurried toward the older dog. Mother and puppy touched noses. The shepherd examined Nell from head to tail. She gave one quick lick across the puppy's ear. Then she turned uphill again. Nell tried to follow. Her short legs carried her 3 steps before she sank into the softer snow beside the road. She climbed out, took 2 more steps, and fell against Micah's boot. The older shepherd looked back, not at Nell this time, at Micah. Something in the stillness of that look unsettled him. It contained no surrender, no confusion. The dog had found her missing puppy, yet she was not trying to take Nell home alone. She was asking for more than the return of one small body. Micah lifted Nell with his left arm and carried her back to the truck. "All right," he said to the shepherd. "Show me." The dog began walking. Micah drove behind her at little more than an idle, keeping enough distance that she did not feel pursued. Whenever the road curved, she waited until the truck came into view before continuing. Kestrel House appeared above the tree line. The old lodge stood on a shelf of land overlooking Bluebird Ridge, its broad roof buried beneath fresh snow. Once, travelers had come there for cross-country skiing and quiet weekends beneath the mountains. Micah had repaired a boiler pump for its owner 2 winters earlier, an older man named Amos Bellamy, who had paid in cash and insisted Micah take home a jar of blackberry preserves. The parking lot was unplowed. No smoke rose from the chimneys. The front windows reflected the white hillside, without showing a single light inside. Micah parked near the rear service lane. The shepherd crossed behind the kitchen and disappeared around a storage building. Micah followed with Nell tucked against his chest. A pine limb had fallen across the rear fence. Its weight had pulled a section of wire mesh away from a post, leaving a gap low enough for a puppy to crawl through. Below the gap, faint tracks wandered downhill toward the road. Micah looked at Nell. "So that's your work." Nell licked melted snow from his glove. Under a metal awning behind the kitchen, 2 more German Shepherd puppies lay curled together inside a nest of old towels and clean burlap sacks. Both raised their heads when the mother approached. One pushed itself upright and stumbled toward her. The other remained in the bedding but wagged its short tail. They were cold and hungry, Micah thought, but not near death. Their eyes were clear. Their movements, though clumsy, were purposeful. The mother positioned herself between Micah and the litter. She did not bare her teeth. She simply became a wall. Micah stopped. "I'm not taking them." The shepherd held his gaze. Micah lowered Nell to the ground. The puppy hurried past her mother and disappeared into the tangle of small bodies. Within seconds, all 3 were climbing over one another, pulling at the same corner of a towel. For the first time since leaving the shop, Micah allowed himself to breathe fully. Then he noticed the water bowl. A thin layer of ice covered the surface. Beside it sat an empty food pan. Micah took out his phone and called Bluebird Veterinary Clinic. Celia Hartwell answered on the 4th ring. Micah knew her only well enough to recognize the firm, unhurried voice of a woman who expected facts before emotion. He gave her the location, the number of dogs, their approximate condition, and the temperature inside the storage area. "I'm 25 minutes out," she said. "Do not separate the mother from the pups. Do not corner her. Can you improve the shelter without approaching the bedding?" "Yes." "Then do only that." Micah almost told her he understood animals. Instead, he said, "All right." He found a portable electric heater in the maintenance room, but the outlet was dead. The main service had been shut off. A small propane utility heater stood on a shelf beside several sealed fuel canisters. Micah checked the hose, valve, and ventilation before carrying it beneath the awning. He set it far enough from the bedding to warm the air without crowding the dogs. His right shoulder protested when he lifted the heater. He shifted the weight to his left hand before the weakness became visible, though there was no one there to see it except the shepherd. She watched anyway. Micah secured a temporary board across the broken section of fence and cleared snow from the entrance. The puppies settled closer to their mother as warmth began to move through the space. Then the shepherd stood. She walked into the storage room and disappeared through a low pet door leading into the lodge. Micah waited. From somewhere inside Kestrel House came the clear ring of a brass bell. The sound carried through the empty rooms, too deliberate to be caused by wind. The shepherd appeared in the pet doorway and looked at him. A second ring followed. Micah crossed the service room and found the inner door secured by a latch glazed with ice. He worked the edge loose with a flat screwdriver, pushed the door inward, and stepped into the darkened kitchen. The air smelled faintly of pine cleaner, cold metal, and a building that had been closed too quickly. The shepherd stood beside the old serving counter. A small brass handbell had been fastened there by a worn leather strap. She lowered her nose and touched the handle. The bell rang a third time. Across the room, 12 wooden root tags hung on a board, marked Winter Round. 8 rested in their proper slots. 4 did not. Micah looked from the empty spaces to the dog waiting beside the bell. He had come up the mountain because one puppy could not climb out of a snowbank. Now 3 puppies were warm. Their mother was accounted for. Help was on the way. That should have been the end of his responsibility. Yet the 4 empty spaces remained. In the silence of the abandoned lodge, they felt less like missing pieces of wood and more like doors no one had opened. Micah stood with melted snow darkening his boots and listened as the bell's final note faded into the cold rooms. He had spent years arranging his life so that no one expected him to return. The shepherd watched him as though someone still did. The third ring of the brass bell was still fading when Micah heard tires grinding through the unplowed lot. He stepped back into the storage room and found Aster beneath the awning, with all 3 puppies gathered against her. Nell had managed to climb halfway over one of her litter mates and fallen asleep there, her folded ear resting across the other puppy's back. The portable heater sent a mild current of warmth through the enclosed corner. It was not enough for the night, but it had taken the sharp edge out of the air. A white utility vehicle stopped beside Micah's truck. The woman who stepped out carried a burnt orange medical bag in one hand and moved with the unhurried purpose of someone who had learned that frightened animals noticed every wasted motion. Dr. Celia Hartwell was in her mid-50s, tall and long-armed, with copper-brown hair streaked in silver and braided low against the collar of an olive canvas coat. Her gray-green eyes went first to Aster, then to the puppies, and only afterward to Micah. "You kept your distance," she said. She made the boundary clear. "That already puts you ahead of half the people who call me." Celia stopped several feet from the bedding and lowered her bag to the concrete. She did not open it immediately. "Aster." The shepherd's ears shifted forward. Celia turned one shoulder toward her instead of approaching head-on. "Hello, girl." Aster watched for several seconds, then moved aside by the width of one puppy. Micah noticed the difference at once. Celia had not been welcomed without condition. She had simply been recognized. "You know her," he said. "She used to come into the clinic with Amos Bellamy." Celia crouched and let Aster smell the back of her hand. "He brought her to me about 8 months ago. Her previous owner was moving into assisted living and couldn't keep her. Aster was already pregnant by then. So she's not one of his trained service dogs. Amos never claimed she was." Celia glanced toward the old lodge. "Other people did that for him. A man helps enough veterans, walks around with a German shepherd, and soon the town improves the story." Aster allowed Celia to touch the fur beneath her jaw. "Amos taught her useful habits," Celia continued. "Waiting at doors, walking beside a cane, checking the person behind her when a group turns. But she isn't a medical alert dog, and she doesn't understand paperwork." From inside the lodge came the quiet settling of old wood. Micah looked toward the kitchen. "She understands the bell." "Routine," Celia said, "not prophecy." There was no mockery in her voice, only care for the truth. Celia began with Aster, showing her each instrument before using it. She checked her eyes, gums, paws, and heart, then examined the 3 puppies one at a time. Nell objected to having her mouth inspected by catching the zipper cord on Celia's medical bag. She planted all 4 paws and backed away. The cord stretched tight. Before Celia could free it, the larger male puppy climbed over Nell's shoulder and landed in the empty water dish. The 3rd puppy seized the same cord from the other side. For several seconds, all 3 pulled with grave concentration, while the bag remained exactly where Celia had placed it. Micah laughed. There was only one sound, low and brief, but it came without permission. He stopped as soon as he heard himself. Celia looked at him, then at the puppies. "They've prescribed treatment." "I don't remember asking." "They rarely wait for consent." Nell lost her grip, rolled backward, and sat upright as though nothing had happened. Aster watched the entire scene without interfering. Her expression carried the weary patience of a mother who had already accepted that dignity would be difficult for the next few months. Celia completed the examinations. "They're about 6 weeks old, a little hungry, a little chilled, but alert. No obvious respiratory trouble. No injuries that concern me tonight." Micah nodded toward the empty food pan. "How long can they stay here?" "Not long, without reliable heat and water." Celia opened several packets of softened puppy food and mixed them with warm water from a thermos. Aster ate only after the bowls had been placed near the bedding, and both humans stepped back. The puppies showed no such restraint. Nell put one front paw directly into the food, pushed the dish against her brother, and began eating from the space she had created. Celia gave Micah a sideways look. Temporary name? Nell. Temporary names are usually the ones people repeat most carefully. Micah ignored that. Celia set conditions before he could offer a plan. Aster stays with the litter. If she leaves, no more than 2 hours. The puppies need heat, regular meals, and someone physically present. She cannot spend a full day following people around town because everyone finds the idea meaningful. She led me here. She found help and brought it home. That doesn't make her public property. The words landed cleanly. Micah had no argument. Headlights moved across the rear wall. A dark station wagon entered the lot and stopped beside Celia's vehicle. A woman stepped out with a leather accordion file pressed beneath one arm and a phone held to her ear. She ended the call before reaching the awning. Laurel Bellamy was younger than Micah had expected, perhaps 48, with a narrow, angular face and chestnut hair cut even with her chin. A single silver streak showed clearly at her right temple. Her moss-colored wool coat was too formal for the snow behind the lodge, and the hem had already picked up a line of road salt. She looked first at the puppies, then at Aster. The careful order of her expression broke. Oh, Lord. Aster did not move toward her. Laurel lowered the file to her side. I was told they were gone. Gone where? Celia asked. Pine Valley Animal Rescue, or your clinic. The messages weren't clear. No one delivered them to me. Laurel closed her eyes for half a second. It was not the reaction of someone caught in a lie. It was the reaction of someone discovering that a task she had placed in the completed column had never begun. She followed them into the lodge, where Micah had turned on 2 battery lanterns. The kitchen appeared less abandoned in the light, though the cold remained in the counters and tiled floor. Laurel saw the winter-round board. Her shoulders tightened. My uncle should have shut this down months ago. He was still using it last month, Celia said. He was doing everything himself last month. Laurel placed the accordion file on the counter and began removing folders, receipts, and printed emails. Her movements were quick and exact, but her fingers trembled when the phone rang again. She silenced it. Amos had a stroke 10 days ago, she said. Mild, according to the neurologist. Mild means he knows who everyone is, but needs help standing and can't finish a sentence without fighting for it. The bitterness in her voice was not directed at Amos. It was directed at the word mild. He's at a rehabilitation center in Missoula. I've been trying to secure the property, pay the contractors, speak to the insurance company, and find out which promises he made without writing them down. And the dogs? Micah asked. Laurel opened a folder. I called the clinic first. Your receptionist said space had to be confirmed. It was never confirmed, Celia said. I know that now. I contacted Pine Valley. Their van couldn't get through after the county closed the upper road. I asked 2 winter-round volunteers to make sure the animals were safe in the meantime. She found a printed message and laid it flat. One volunteer had written, checked the lodge. All quiet. The man who sent this came through the front entrance, Laurel said. Aster must have been away from the building. He assumed the rescue had already taken them. And the second volunteer, Micah asked, believed the first had handled it. Laurel removed another page. The rescue thought I would call when the road reopened. I thought they would call me. The clinic was waiting for confirmation. Everyone had one portion of the task. No one owned the final answer. Beyond the wall, a puppy yelped in protest when another lay across it. No cruelty had placed them in the cold. That truth made the room feel heavier, not lighter. A deliberate person could be confronted. A dishonest one could be exposed. But there was no single face for a chain of reasonable assumptions. Laurel closed the folder. I'll arrange transport for all 4 tomorrow morning. Celia shook her head. Not all 4, unless Aster enters the crate willingly. and the puppies should not be separated from her yet. The lodge has no active insurance. The dogs don't understand insurance. I do, Laurel replied. If someone is injured here, my uncle could lose the property that pays for his rehabilitation. Micah expected Celia to push harder. Instead, the veterinarian nodded. That is a real concern. It still doesn't make forced transport safe. The two women looked at each other across the cold kitchen, one responsible for living animals, the other responsible for a man's medical bills and property. Neither was wrong enough to dismiss. Aster entered through the pet door. She crossed the kitchen without looking at them and stopped beside the brass bell. One touch of her nose produced a single clear note. Laurel's face changed. She still does that? What did it mean? Micah asked. Nothing mystical. Laurel's voice softened. Amos hung route tags there. When everyone returned, he put them back on the board and told Aster to ring the bell. Micah studied the 12 slots. 8 contained wooden tags. 4 remained empty. Laurel followed his gaze. Winter round is suspended. Those tags were from this week. Yes. Who are the 4? Initials and route codes are on the front. The private information is in the administrative file. Have they been checked? Laurel looked at the board rather than at Micah. They have families, neighbors, county services. That wasn't my question. The heater beneath the awning clicked as its thermostat adjusted. Somewhere in the lodge, water contracted inside an unused pipe. Micah waited. Laurel finally opened the accordion file again. The folder marked Current Routes contained consent forms, phone numbers, and practical notes. No hidden messages, no secret inheritance, only ordinary information that became important when weather closed a road or a furnace stopped. The 4 missing tags belonged to households on the northern and eastern side roads. One resident used a landline. Another had no family within 200 miles. A third had declined daily calls, but agreed to an in-person visit after heavy snow. The 4th record had a handwritten note from Amos. Do not arrive unannounced. Call Maeve first. Micah looked toward the dark windows. The afternoon light was already withdrawing from the valley. The forecast on Laurel's phone showed falling temperatures the following night. Who called them after Amos went into the hospital? He asked. Laurel turned through the pages. Her silence became the answer. Micah had spent years believing neglect announced itself through obvious things. An unlocked weapon, an unchecked engine, a man leaving his post. But sometimes neglect looked like 4 competent people each completing 90% of a task. Sometimes it looked like a message marked, "Read." Sometimes no one intended harm, and harm still found the empty space between them. Laurel leaned both hands against the counter. I should have confirmed the dogs. Yes, Micah said. The bluntness made Celia look at him. Laurel did not flinch. Yes, she repeated. I should have. Micah respected her more for not offering an excuse. Celia returned to the puppies and began preparing a schedule for the night. Laurel called a local propane supplier and arranged enough fuel to keep the rear shelter warm until morning. Micah checked the ventilation again, repaired the broken fence more securely, and placed a second sheet of plywood along the windward side. Their tasks overlapped without anyone pretending the situation had been solved. Before leaving, Celia wrote feeding times on a sheet taped beside the pet door. I'll return at 7, she said. Aster stays here. One person stays with the litter. Laurel looked at the folders spread across the counter. I'll stay. Micah glanced at the 4 empty spaces. I'll check the routes tomorrow. Laurel looked up. You don't work for Winter Round. No. You aren't responsible for these people. No. Then why? Micah looked through the pet door. Aster had stretched beside the puppies, placing her body between them and the cold entrance. Nell slept with her chin across her mother's front paw. Micah thought of all the years he had treated responsibility like a locked room, something that belonged entirely to whoever entered first. Maybe that was how one man ended up carrying too much. Maybe it was also how everyone else learned to walk past. One time, Micah said, I verify the 4 addresses. After that, the county, the families, or whoever belongs in this system takes over. Laurel studied him, as if she knew temporary arrangements were rarely as temporary as people claimed. This was never your assignment. Micah pulled on his canvas jacket. Aster raised her head. No, he said. But it appears she hasn't closed it. Behind him, the brass bell rested quietly on the counter. This time, it did not need to ring. The 4 empty spaces had already said enough. By 7 the next morning, the sky above Bluebird Ridge had turned the color of polished steel. Micah loaded the truck in the order he expected to use things. Blankets behind the driver's seat, water and food in a covered box, flashlights in the center console, tools beneath the rear bench. He added spare batteries, 2 smoke detector units, a roll of pipe insulation, and a small first aid kit. He did not pack for uncertainty. He packed to remove it. Inside Kestrel House, Celia Hartwell had just finished feeding the puppies. Nell stood with both front paws in an empty bowl, licking the rim as if breakfast might return through persistence. Aster lay nearby, watching all 3 pups, while Celia checked the time. 2 hours, the veterinarian said. Not 2 hours, plus whatever you decide doesn't count. Micah zipped his field jacket. 4 addresses. That is a number, not a travel time. I've driven the roads. Have you driven them after last night's freeze? Micah looked through the window at the pale sheen covering the parking lot. Celia handed him a folded sheet with feeding times. If you run late, call. Aster comes back before you finish the route if necessary. Laurel remained at the dining room table beneath a battery lantern, surrounded by insurance papers and winter round records. She had slept perhaps 3 hours. A pencil rested behind one ear, and her reading glasses had left faint marks along the bridge of her nose. The first 3 residents confirmed participation this winter, she said. The 4th file is less clear. Amos wrote most of the updates by hand. Micah placed the 4 wooden route tags in his coat pocket. I'll verify the addresses and return them. Laurel looked at him over the edge of a folder. People are not tags. I know. Her expression suggested she was not yet convinced. Outside, Micah opened the rear passenger door and whistled once. Aster remained beside the lodge steps. He tried a command used by one of the dog handlers he had known in the Navy. Load. Aster turned her head toward the road. Micah tapped the seat. Nothing. Behind him came the crunch of confident footsteps and the click of a metal thermos against a belt buckle. Maeve Corbin crossed the parking lot wearing a faded Navy postal parka, corduroy trousers, and black snow boots that looked old enough to have opinions. She was short and broad through the shoulders, with silver curls escaping from beneath an olive gold scarf. A worn leather mailbag hung across her body. She carried a dark red thermos in one hand and an old wool blanket in the other. You're using the wrong door, she said. Micah looked at the open rear door. It's a door. Not to her. Maeve walked around the truck, opened the opposite rear door, and spread the blanket across the seat. The fabric carried several old repairs and a faint smell of cedar. She gave 2 light taps against the doorframe. Up and settle, Aster. The shepherd crossed the lot and stepped into the truck without hesitation. She turned once on the blanket and lay down facing the window. Maeve closed the door. She isn't being difficult, she said. She's waiting for someone who knows what he's doing. Micah took the thermos from her before she could climb into the passenger seat. What's this? Coffee. I have coffee. That explains your expression. It does not explain your coffee. She opened the passenger door herself. Micah stood for a moment with the thermos in his hand. Then he placed it in the cup holder and got behind the wheel. The first route climbed west through a row of small houses built into the lower hillside. Snow had been cleared from the main road, but the side streets remained narrow, with high banks at each shoulder. Maeve directed him without consulting the map. Second cedar after the green mailbox. There are 6 cedars. Only one has a green mailbox. The house belonged to Henry Vale, a retired English teacher nearing 80. He opened the door in a wool vest with 3 buttons fastened, and the 4th caught halfway through the wrong hole. His hands trembled visibly. Aster waited on the porch until Henry noticed her. "Well," he said. "Amos sent the better-looking half of the team." Maeve stepped inside first. "Amos is recovering. Today you get the substitute staff." Henry looked at Micah. "Does he speak?" "Only when the repair estimate is unpleasant," Maeve said. Aster entered after Henry moved aside. She did not crowd him or circle the room. She lay beside a wooden chair and waited while he worked at the last button of his vest. Micah checked the furnace. The ignition was functioning, but a loose return air panel had begun vibrating against the frame. He tightened it and changed a clogged filter Henry had stored in the utility closet. When Micah returned to the kitchen, Maeve was examining the contents of the refrigerator. "You're low on fresh food," she said. "I have canned soup. You have 14 cans of tomato soup and 1 onion that has lost its faith." Henry smiled. The grocery delivery had missed his road after the storm. Maeve called the store and arranged a delivery to Kestrel House, where a volunteer could bring it up later. Micah had repaired the obvious problem. Maeve had found the one that would matter in 3 days. Back in the truck, he returned Henry's tag to the envelope. "One address," he said. Maeve unscrewed the thermos. "One man." The second stop belonged to Ruth Calder, a retired pianist who lived in a narrow yellow house with a covered porch and wind chimes wrapped in cloth for winter. Ruth was 74, fine-boned and upright, with white hair gathered at the nape of her neck. She wore a forest green cardigan and greeted Aster before either human. "You may come in," she told the dog. "The tall one may wipe his boots first." Her heat was working. Her food shelves were full. Her landline rang clearly when Maeve tested it. Micah found no mechanical problem until Aster stopped beneath the hallway smoke detector and looked up. The dog did not bark or paw at the wall. She simply remained there. Micah followed her gaze. The detector's indicator light was dark. He replaced the battery while Ruth produced a tin of dog biscuits. Aster accepted one. Ruth offered another from the folds of her sleeve. Aster turned her head away. Micah climbed down from the step stool. "She has better discipline than most of my customers." Ruth looked at him. "Do your customers hide biscuits in their clothing? Some of them hide worse things in snowblowers." Maeve laughed into her scarf. Ruth's eyes brightened, not because the joke was especially good, but because Micah had made one at all. Before they left, she touched Aster gently behind the ear and said, "Tell Amos I am still practicing the Schubert." Maeve did not promise that Amos would return soon. She only said, "I'll tell him." There was mercy in that answer. It offered hope without borrowing against the truth. At the third house, no one responded to the knock. Micah knocked again, harder. Maeve caught his sleeve before he reached for the door. "Simon Trask is hard of hearing. He does not like people pounding on his house." "How does he know someone is here?" Aster walked off the porch and crossed to the front window. She stood several feet back where the morning light fell across her body. Inside, a curtain shifted. A thin man with a white mustache appeared behind the glass. He lifted one finger, then disappeared. A minute later, the door opened. Simon wore a charcoal work shirt and hearing aids in both ears. She remembers the window. Aster waited until he invited them inside. Micah watched the exchange more carefully than he had at Henry's house. Aster had not treated the closed door as an obstacle. She had treated it as a boundary. At each home, her behavior changed. not because she possessed some impossible understanding, but because someone had taught her that people deserved to be approached in the way they could receive. Micah had spent most of his life believing the correct response to a barrier was to overcome it. Aster seemed to understand that some barriers were instructions. Simon's house was warm, and his supplies were adequate. Maeve checked his backup telephone amplifier, while Micah inspected an extension cord feeding a space heater in the workshop. The cord was rated properly and showed no heat damage. Nothing needed to be taken away. Nothing needed to be improved simply because Micah might have done it differently. When they returned to the truck, Maeve wrote the time beside Simon's route code. Micah looked at her notes. You record permission before the condition, because permission comes first. In an emergency, it doesn't always. This isn't one. He started the engine. Maeve fastened her seatbelt. You think the route is 4 houses? It is 4 addresses. No, it is 4 different ways of being welcomed. Micah pulled away from the curb. The words stayed with him longer than he wanted. He remembered his former wife standing in their kitchen years ago, asking him not to solve a problem she had not yet finished explaining. He had thought waiting was neglect. She had called it respect. At the time, Micah had believed only one of them could be right. The 4th address stood on a ridge above an open meadow. No smoke rose from the chimney, but the driveway had been plowed recently. Micah knocked. Maeve checked the side window. The house was empty. A neighbor across the road came outside carrying a snow shovel. She recognized the former resident's name and told them he had moved in with his sister near Bozeman 3 weeks earlier. Amos knew, Maeve said once they were back in the truck. He must not have updated the card before the stroke. Micah drew a line through the route code and wrote the new information beneath it. That makes 4. 3 checked, Maeve corrected. 1 outdated. Still completed. Aster needed to return to her puppies. Celia's 2-hour limit was approaching. Micah started down the ridge toward Kestrel House. At the first intersection, Aster stood in the rear seat. She looked through the side window toward a narrow road climbing between 2 stands of pine. Micah continued straight. Aster shifted to the opposite window, then turned in a slow circle on Amos's blanket. Maeve looked back. What is it? Aster gave no bark. She moved to the door and stood facing the side road. Micah stopped at the shoulder. That road isn't on the tags. No, Maeve said. Then we go back. Aster stepped down when Micah opened the door. She did not run. She walked toward the side road, checked behind her, and continued uphill. Micah reached for the leash. Maeve placed one hand on his arm. She knows a house up there. She also has puppies waiting. Then call Celia. Micah looked at his watch. They had less than 20 minutes before the agreed return time. Aster stopped beneath the pines and looked back. The choice irritated him because neither option was clean. Follow the schedule and ignore the only living guide who seemed certain of the road. Follow Aster and break the limit Celia had established for good reason. Micah called the veterinarian. We found the 4, he said. 1 moved. Aster is leading us toward another address. How far? Unknown. That is not a distance. Maeve says the road is short. Maeve leaned toward the phone. 1/2 mile, unless the mountain has grown since Tuesday. Celia exhaled. 20 additional minutes. No more. If Aster shows stress, you turn around. Micah ended the call and clipped on the leash without pulling it tight. 20 minutes, he said. Aster continued uphill. The road narrowed between snow-covered pines before opening onto a small house set against the slope. Its walkway had been cleared with careful, narrow strokes. No winter-round marker stood near the mailbox. Maeve became quiet. You know who lives here? Micah said. I know who used to be on the route. Aster stopped at the bottom step. She did not approach the door. She waited. Micah climbed the porch and knocked once. Movement crossed behind the curtain. A lock turned. The woman who opened the door was slim and straight-backed, with steel-gray hair cut close around her ears. Her amber-brown eyes moved from Micah to Maeve, then settled on Aster. Recognition appeared first. Anger followed. "Nora," Maeve said. Nora Pell opened the door no wider. "I told Amos to take my name off that list." Aster remained at the bottom of the steps, waiting to be invited. Micah looked at the dog, then at the woman who clearly wanted them gone. For the first time that morning, the closed door was not a problem to be solved. It was the answer they had been given. Nora Pell kept one hand on the edge of the door. She was 69, slender and straight-backed, with steel-gray hair cut close around her ears, and amber-brown eyes that did not soften simply because snow stood on someone's shoulders. A dark cardigan lay over a charcoal turtleneck. Nothing about her suggested frailty. Her gaze moved from Maeve to Micah, then down to Aster, waiting at the bottom of the steps. "I told Amos to take my name off that list." "He did," Maeve said, "at least from the board." "Then why are you here?" Micah answered before Maeve could. "The dog brought us." Nora looked at him for a long moment. "A dog remembering my house does not mean I agreed to visitors." The sentence was quiet. That made it harder to dismiss. Micah glanced at Aster. The shepherd had not climbed the steps. She stood in the snow with her weight balanced evenly, watching Nora without pulling at the leash. Maeve lowered her voice. 4 routes were left unfinished after Amos went into rehabilitation. We were checking the records. Aster recognized your road. That explains how you arrived. Does not explain why you knocked. Micah felt the old impatience rise, the part of him that wanted to point to the weather, the empty route board and the coming cold. Facts, arranged properly, had once been enough to move men under pressure. Nora was not one of his men. "We wanted to make sure you were all right," he said. "I am standing in my own doorway telling you I am." Behind Nora, a wall clock marked the seconds with a soft wooden click. Maeve shifted the red thermos beneath one arm. "May we come in long enough to explain?" Nora looked at her, then at Aster. "Aster may come in." Micah started to lift the tool bag from the porch. "You may leave that outside," Nora said. He stopped. "I haven't asked you to repair anything." Micah set the bag down. Nora opened the door wider. Aster climbed the steps only after Nora moved aside and said her name. The shepherd entered without exploring. She crossed the small living room and settled on a square rug beside a writing desk. The place had the order of a room arranged by someone who trusted systems, but disliked clutter. A black spiral notebook lay beside a landline telephone. Colored tabs marked its pages. A portable radio sat on a piece of dark felt rather than directly on the wooden desk. Micah remained near the door. Maeve called Celia from the kitchen and explained where they were. After a brief exchange, she covered the phone. "Celia says 15 minutes, 20 at most." Nora raised one eyebrow. "Am I delaying the dog from something important?" 3 puppies, Maeve said. For the first time, Nora's expression changed. "Aster had them?" 6 weeks ago near enough, Maeve replied. "They are warm and fed. We will not keep her longer than agreed." Nora nodded once. The limit appeared to satisfy her more than any reassurance might have. She poured coffee into 3 cups without asking whether anyone wanted it. Micah suspected that was not hospitality, so much as control over the length of the visit. He remained standing until Nora pointed toward a chair. "If you intend to explain yourselves, sit down. Looming is not an argument." Maeve hid a smile behind her cup. Micah sat. Aster rested her chin on the rug. Nora took the chair nearest the desk. "Amos began coming here once a week after my husband died. I agreed to that. A short visit. A check that the telephone worked. Nothing more." She spoke with the even cadence of someone accustomed to keeping frightened callers focused on what mattered. "You worked emergency dispatch," Micah said. 28 years, Maeve nodded. "Best calm voice in 3 counties. And the worst patience for foolishness," Nora added. There was no pride in it, only accuracy. "Last winter," she continued, "I slipped on the back step. I bruised my hip. I did not strike my head. I called Maeve because I needed help tightening the handrail." Micah glanced toward the rear hallway. Nora noticed. "That's not an invitation to inspect it." He looked back at her. "Amos came instead," she said. "He called my niece before asking whether I wanted her involved. He arranged daily visits. Then he kept a spare key because he said it was safer." "Did you give him this key?" Micah asked. "I allowed him to borrow it while the lock was being replaced. He never returned it." Maeve's face lost its humor. "I didn't know that." "You were no longer working the route." Each decision, Micah thought, could have been defended. An older woman had fallen. Her family should know. More visits reduced risk. A spare key could save time in an emergency. He knew that kind of reasoning. It formed a clean chain until the person at the center of it disappeared. "I told Amos to stop," Nora said. "He heard fear where I meant instruction. After that, every time I objected, he became more certain I needed supervision." Aster lifted her head at Amos's name, then lowered it again. "He cared about you," Maeve said carefully. "I know." The answer came without hesitation. "That is what made it difficult. If he had been cruel, I could have closed the door and felt nothing. Amos was kind. He was also wrong." Micah looked toward the window. For years, he had treated good intentions like a shield. He had believed that if the goal was protection, the method could be forgiven later. His former wife had once stood beside a packed suitcase and asked him why every concern she raised became another reason for him to tighten his grip. He had told her he was trying to keep their life from falling apart. She had answered, "You never asked whether I wanted to live inside what you were holding together." At the time, Micah had considered the sentence unfair. Now it returned with an accuracy that felt almost merciful. He cleared his throat. "I can check the furnace before we leave. The generator too." Nora looked at him. "Did you hear anything I just said?" Micah felt Maeve become still beside him. Nora leaned back. "Are you planning to repair my whole house before asking what I need?" The old answer rose first. He was offering help, not control. This time he did not say it. "What do you need?" he asked. Nora studied him long enough to make the question cost something. "The latch on the rear storm door is loose. It catches when the temperature drops." "That's all?" "That is what I asked for." Micah stood, collected the tool bag from the porch, and followed Nora to the back door. The latch plate had shifted less than 1/8 of an inch. He loosened 2 screws, reset the alignment, and tightened them again. The work took 4 minutes. He tested the door once. Then, instead of checking the frame, hinge, weather stripping, and handrail, he put the screwdriver away. Nora opened and closed the door herself. "It works." Micah nodded. No gratitude was requested. None was offered. Yet something between them had changed. Not trust, not yet, but the first honest inch of ground. When they returned to the living room, Nora opened the black notebook. "Winter round failed before Amos had the stroke," she said. The stroke only revealed it. Maeve sat forward. Nora turned several tabbed pages. Amos knew Henry needed food delivered after snow. He knew Simon watched the window instead of listening for the door. He knew Ruth would accept help if she could offer something in return. None of that was written in the route cards. "How do you know?" Micah asked. "Because I helped design the first version." Maeve looked surprised. "You never told me." Amos wanted names and addresses. I wanted consent preferences, communication needs, and a second person who knew every route. He said paperwork would make kindness feel official. And you disagreed, Micah said. I told him kindness becomes dangerous when no one can verify what was promised. Nora tapped the notebook. Amos carried the important parts in his head. Everyone admired him for remembering. No one asked what happened when he could not answer the telephone. Micah thought of Laurel's folder, the unconfirmed rescue transfer, and the 4 empty spaces on the route board. The same weakness ran through all of it. Not malice, dependence. One good man had become the hinge on which too many doors turned. Nora's landline rang. She picked up on the second tone. Pell. Her posture changed as she listened. The room seemed to tighten around the steadiness of her voice. When? A pause. How wide is the service area? She reached for the black pen beside her notebook. Yes, I understand. Nora wrote 3 lines, thanked the caller, and hung up. Maeve set down her cup. County? An old colleague. Nora turned the notebook so they could read. Ice had cracked a component at the North Slope electrical substation. The utility company planned a controlled outage the following morning, so crews could replace it before the next wind event. 3 hours, Nora said. Possibly 6 if the damaged assembly does not come free cleanly. Micah's mind moved ahead immediately. Homes with electric heat, roads with weak cellular coverage, backup generators that had not been tested, people who might refuse transportation until the power was already gone. We need to check every route tonight. We? Nora asked. I can cover the north roads. Maeve can take. No. Micah looked at her. Nora closed the notebook. I will not hand you information so you can turn yourself into Amos with broader shoulders. That is not what I'm doing. You assigned routes before asking whether I would participate. Micah opened his mouth, then stopped. Again. The second correction hurt more because he could no longer pretend the first had been unclear. Nora folded her hands over the notebook. I will help coordinate under 3 conditions. No one travels alone. No resident's plan is changed without asking them. And no one is called a rescue case unless there is an actual emergency. We have 1 night, Micah said. Then we have 1 night to do it correctly. Outside, a patch of snow slid from the roof and landed with a soft rush. Maeve looked between them. She's right. Micah turned toward the window. Aster had risen from the rug and stood beside Nora's chair. The shepherd did not look at Micah. She lowered herself slowly and lay across Nora's feet. Nora rested one hand against the dog's shoulder. Micah removed the folded roadmap from his coat. For a moment, he held it between both hands. Then he placed it on Nora's desk. Not as evidence, not as an order, as an offering. Nora opened it and drew the notebook closer. Call Laurel, she said. We need the current files. Maeve reached for the telephone. Micah remained standing beside the desk, no longer at the head of anything. Beyond the window, winter sunlight lay bright across the mountain. By the following morning, much of the North Slope would be without power. They had 12 households to confirm, old information to correct, and only a few hours of daylight left. The work had finally become too large for one person. For the first time, Micah understood that this might be the saving grace of it. By the time Micah, Maeve, and Aster returned to Kestrel House, the winter sun had dropped behind the western ridge. The lodge stood in long blue shadow, its windows reflecting the last light above the valley. Inside, the dining room had become a temporary office. Laurel's folders covered one table. Nora's black notebook lay open beside the telephone. Route cards, consent forms, and handwritten corrections had been arranged beneath battery lanterns. Celia met them near the rear hall. You used every minute I gave you. Aster showed no signs of stress, Micah said. That was not an answer. Maeve removed her scarf. He called before we were late, returned the dog before supper, and followed instructions even when it caused visible discomfort. Celia looked at Micah. Should I write down the date? Aster had already crossed into the warmed storage area. Nell and the other two puppies climbed over one another to reach her. Their reunion lasted less than 10 seconds before Nell noticed the loose end of Celia's towel and began pulling it through the bedding. Micah turned back toward the dining room. The work ahead had grown while they were gone. Nora had placed 12 route cards into 3 groups. The first included homes with wood stoves, propane heat, or tested generators. The second held residents who could stay home if someone checked their backup systems. The third contained people who might need transportation before the power went out. Laurel stood beside a calculator and a row of receipts. Her moss-colored coat was gone, replaced by a flannel shirt and dark quilted vest. The silver streak at her temple caught the lantern light whenever she bent over the figures. Micah studied the lodge. This room can hold 30 people. Laurel did not look up. It used to. It still has tables, a kitchen, and 2 bathrooms. It also has expired insurance, an untested fire alarm, and a rear exit that freezes shut. We can fix the exit. You cannot repair a liability policy with a screwdriver. Micah set his gloves on the table. If the north slope loses heat, people need somewhere warm. They do, Laurel said. That does not automatically make this building legal or safe. Nora closed her notebook. She's right. Micah looked from one woman to the other. The church hall is downhill. Some of those roads may be difficult after dark. Then transportation has to be part of the plan, Laurel said. Not an excuse to place vulnerable people in a building no one has inspected. Her tone was firm, but not defensive. She was not protecting empty property from people in need. She was protecting the possibility that Kestrel House might still serve them after tomorrow. If someone falls here, Laurel continued, or the wiring fails, Amos could lose the property that pays for his rehabilitation. Winter round would end before anyone had a chance to rebuild it. Micah had no answer that made her concern smaller. Headlights swept across the front windows. A county utility vehicle stopped near the lodge entrance. A woman stepped out carrying a bright yellow waterproof clipboard and wearing a Navy emergency shell over an olive fleece. Dana Whitlock entered without ceremony. She was 58, tall and broad-shouldered, with deep brown skin and close-cropped salt and pepper hair. Her expression carried the calm of someone who had listened to bad plans in rooms full of confident people and had learned not to be hurried by either. Nora made the introductions. Micah Danner, Dana said, looking at him. Former Navy. SEAL. That tells me what you used to do. What can you safely do tonight? The distinction landed before Micah had prepared for it. I repaired generators, snow equipment, small engines. I know the roads. Good. That is useful. Dana set the clipboard on the table. She had confirmed the outage with the utility company. Crews would cut power at 7 the following morning. The expected duration was 3 hours, though damaged hardware and wind could extend it to 6. The church hall will open at 6:30, Dana said. It has inspected exits, backup heat, accessible restrooms, and current insurance. Kestrel House will be a staging point only. Micah folded his arms. What if someone refuses transport? They have that right unless there is an immediate, documented emergency. What if their backup system is questionable? Then we explain the risk, offer options, and ask what they choose. Nora gave Micah a quiet look. Dana continued. No one drives a route alone. Each pair gets a radio, a check-in time, and a return deadline. If a resident stays home, someone confirms their heat source and communication plan. If they leave, we record where they go and who transported them. She glanced toward the rear hall, where the puppies could be heard moving through their bedding. The dog? Aster can take one short route, Celia said from the doorway. No more. She returns to the litter afterward. Dana wrote it down without romanticizing the contribution. No one treats her as an emergency worker. She is a familiar animal accompanying people she knows. That is exactly what she is, Celia said. For the next 2 hours, Kestrel House filled slowly with practical people. 2 county road employees arrived in insulated coveralls. A church deacon brought a list of available cots and volunteers. A grocery manager sent boxes of soup, bread, coffee, and shelf-stable milk. No one entered to applause. They removed coats, accepted tasks, and asked where the extra batteries were kept. Nora managed the calls. Her voice changed slightly with each person. She spoke loudly and clearly to Simon, waded through Henry's long pauses, and assured Ruth that the church piano had not been tuned in years, but remained playable at her own risk. Micah watched her work. She did not ask, "Are you safe?" As though safety were a yes or no condition. She asked specific questions. What heats the house? When was the generator last tested? Who can reach you if the landline fails? Would you prefer someone to stay, or would you rather leave before the outage begins? Beside her, Laurel tracked every promised gallon of fuel and every vehicle assignment. After an hour, she pushed a page toward Micah. Amos paid for nearly all of this himself. The receipts went back 3 winters: gasoline, batteries, groceries, furnace filters, hotel rooms during a storm, veterinary food for Aster. Some purchases had been reimbursed. Most had not. "He never told anyone," Maeve said. "He probably considered that the point," Laurel replied. There was no admiration in her voice now, only concern. "A system that survives because one man quietly empties his savings is not generous," she said. "It is temporary." Micah looked toward the root board. Amos had been praised for always showing up. No one had asked what it cost him, or what would remain when he could not. Faith was sometimes mistaken for carrying every burden without complaint. Micah had believed that himself. But a burden hidden from everyone could not be shared, and what could not be shared would eventually be dropped. Dana divided the routes. The steepest one climbed a narrow service road on the northern slope. It included 2 homes with electric furnaces and 1 resident whose generator had not been tested since autumn. "I'll take that," Micah said. Dana checked the sheet. "County road crew takes it. I know the equipment. They know the road conditions and have a vehicle rated for the grade. I can ride with them. You are assigned with Maeve on the East Loop. That route is mostly level." "Yes." Micah heard the judgment where there was only logistics. "The north route may need mechanical work. So may the East Loop." Micah picked up a compact generator from beside the wall. "I'll test this and load it as backup." The machine weighed less than many engines he handled at the shop. He bent, secured his grip, and lifted with both hands. The first movement was clean. Then his right shoulder lost strength. Not pain alone. Absence. The weight shifted without warning. Micah tried to compensate with his left arm, but the generator struck the edge of the open tailgate and dropped into the snow. The impact was dull, not violent. No fuel spilled. No one stood close enough to be hurt. Still, the room behind him went silent. Micah reached down. Dana stepped between him and the machine. "Leave it. I have it." "No." It slipped. It slipped because your right arm stopped carrying its share. Maeve stood near the lodge door with her gloves tucked beneath one arm. "You changed hands when you lifted Nell," she said. "You let me carry the tool bag at Simon's. Yesterday, you kept that right elbow against your side every time you opened a heavy door." Micah looked at her. "You were keeping a list?" "I delivered mail for 42 years. Observing what people hope you will ignore is part of the work." Celia came outside and crouched beside the generator. She checked the casing and fuel cap. "The machine is fine." "So am I," Micah said. Dana straightened. "You may be. The plan is not." The word struck harder than accusation. "A person who hides a physical limit during emergency preparation is not protecting the team," Dana said. He is creating another failure point. Micah's jaw tightened. I did not lie. No. You arranged the truth so no one could use it. The county workers lifted the generator into their truck. Micah could have argued. He could have taken his own vehicle and driven the North Road before anyone stopped him. 5 years earlier, he would have called that initiative. Now he saw the shape of the choice more clearly. If he left alone, everyone would have to change the plan around him. Nora would track him. Dana would divert people if he missed a check-in. Maeve would wonder whether his shoulder had failed. He would become the center of the system simply by refusing to trust it. Micah looked at the North Route card. Then he handed it to the senior road employee. The generator's choke sticks in deep cold, he said. Hold it halfway for the first pull. Do not flood it. The man nodded. Understood. Micah did not feel relieved. Growth rarely felt noble while it was happening. Sometimes it felt like standing beside a road, while someone else drove the vehicle you believed belonged to you. Inside the storage room, Celia attempted to fold clean towels into a plastic basket. Nell seized one corner and backed away. The second puppy climbed into the basket. The third followed and sat heavily on top of the folded towels. Celia watched them for a moment, then placed an empty basket beside the first. There, she said. Your assignment. Nell caught the handle between her teeth and pulled. The basket slid across the floor with both littermates still sitting inside, their expressions solemn and pleased. Even Dana laughed. The sound loosened something in the room. By 9 that evening, 11 households had confirmed plans. Henry would remain home with a grocery delivery, a neighbor, and a wood stove backup. Ruth had accepted transportation to the church hall on the condition that no one call her departure an evacuation. Simon's nephew would stay with him through the outage. The last unresolved call belonged to Curtis Wynn. Nora reached him shortly before 10. His voice came through the speaker rough but steady. I spent 36 years keeping power on in weather worse than this. No one questioned your experience, Nora said. Then stop asking me to sit in a church basement. It is a hall, Curtis. It has windows. I'm staying home. Nora did not argue. What is your backup heat? Propane wall unit. Tested? This afternoon. Radio charged? Yes. They agreed Curtis would check in when the outage began, and again 30 minutes later. If he failed either call, a paired team would visit. You are not asking permission to rescue me, Curtis said. No, Nora replied. I am asking you to keep your word. A pause followed. I can do that. Before midnight, the last route cards were assigned. Micah slept for less than 4 hours on a cot in the lodge office. At 6, he woke to the sound of volunteers moving through the halls and the smell of coffee Maeve claimed was finally strong enough to qualify as useful. Outside, dawn came clear and bitter. At 7 precisely, the lights in the valley went out. The lodge remained powered by a small backup system. Radios crackled. Route teams reported departure. Curtis checked in on time. Power is off, he said. Wall heater is running. House is holding temperature. Nora marked the time. Next call in 30 minutes. Micah stood beside Maeve near the East Route supplies. Aster waited at the door, wearing her brown leather collar and watching both of them. The first reports came in. Road clear. Residents staying home. Transportation complete. Generator running. At 7:30, Nora lifted this radio. Curtis Wynn, this is Wynn around. Scheduled check. Static answered. She waited 5 seconds and called again. Nothing. Micah looked toward the North Slope map. Nora tried the landline. It rang until the connection failed. The room seemed to grow quieter around the radio. Dana checked the clock. Micah reached for his jacket. Curtis had kept the first promise. He had not answered the second. The morning was bright enough to hurt the eyes. Snow lay across Bluebird Ridge in hard white plains. reflecting sunlight into every window and windshield. The sky was clear, yet the cold had deepened after dawn. Breath gathered in pale crystals along scarves and exposed metal-burned bare skin within seconds. At Kestrel House, the route teams were already moving. Each pair carried a radio, a blanket, a wooden route tag, and a written return time. Dana stood near the front table, checking names against her yellow clipboard. Nora sat beside the radio station with her black notebook open and 3 sharpened pencils aligned at the top of the page. No one left without a partner. No one left without reporting where they were going. Micah stood near the East Route supplies with his jacket half-zipped when Nora tried Curtis Wynn for the 3rd time. "Curtis, this is Winter Round." "Scheduled check." Static filled the dining room. Nora waited, then repeated the call. Nothing. Dana checked the clock. 5 minutes past the agreement. Micah reached for his gloves. "We go now." Dana looked at the assignment board. "You, Maeve, and Aster. Curtis knows the dog, and Maeve knows the property." Celia stepped from the rear hall. Aster stood beside her, alert but calm. The puppies had eaten and were sleeping in the heated storage room under Laurel's supervision. "One route only," Celia said. "You bring her back when this is finished." Micah clipped the leash to Aster's brown leather collar. "We will." Dana handed him a radio. "You observe first. No forced entry without a clear reason. Report what you find." Micah nodded. A year earlier, he might have heard the instruction as distrust. This morning, he heard it as part of the plan. Maeve carried the red thermos beneath one arm as they crossed the parking lot. "You brought coffee?" "I brought judgment in liquid form. We may need tools. I saw you load those. You did not see me load coffee. That is why I remain useful." Aster stepped into the truck through the door she knew and settled on Amos's old blanket. The drive to Curtis's property took 11 minutes. The road climbed through a stand of lodgepole pine, where snow had drifted against the trunks, and the wind moved loose powder across the surface like smoke. Micah kept the truck in low gear and avoided the glazed center of the lane. Curtis's house stood near the end of the road, a narrow cedar-sided building with a detached workshop behind it. His pickup remained in the driveway. No smoke rose from the chimney, though the house relied partly on a propane wall heater. The outage would not have stopped it. Micah parked without blocking the drive. Aster stepped down and looked toward the front porch. There were no fresh tire tracks. No footprints crossed the snow between the house and the road. Maeve studied the front windows. "Curtis opens those curtains every morning." Today they were closed. Micah climbed the porch and knocked. "Curtis." No answer. He knocked harder. Still nothing. Micah tested the handle. Locked. His hand moved toward the flat pry bar in his tool bag. Maeve looked at him. "He told Nora no one enters unless there is an actual emergency." He missed the call. "That gives us a reason to check. It does not yet give us permission to break the door." Micah looked through the narrow glass beside the frame. The hallway appeared empty. No one lay on the floor. No sound came from inside. He keyed the radio. "Dana, we are at the property. Vehicle present. House secure. No response at the front door. Any visible distress? None. Continue exterior check. Report before entry." Micah released the button. The words cost them perhaps 15 seconds. They also kept the decision from belonging to him alone. Aster moved off the porch. She lowered her nose near the bottom step, followed a scent along the side of the house, then continued toward the workshop behind the pines. The shepherd did not pull hard or bark. She walked with purpose, stopping once to check that Maeve remained behind them. The workshop door faced away from the road. A layer of snow had blown against its lower edge. The sliding track above it was coated with ice. Aster sat directly in front of the door. Micah approached the small side window. Frost covered most of the glass. He removed one glove and cleared a circle with the heel of his hand. Movement appeared inside. Curtis Wynn stood near a shelving unit, wearing brown canvas overalls over a forest green flannel shirt. His white mustache and lined face were visible beneath a navy knit cap. He held one hand against the shelf, while reaching with the other toward a metal transfer switch stored above shoulder height. Micah struck the window frame with his palm. Curtis turned. His expression showed irritation before relief. He crossed the workshop and pushed at the door from inside. It moved less than an inch. Micah called through the glass, "Are you hurt?" Curtis shook his head. "Chest pain?" "No." "Dizzy?" "No." Door jammed. His voice was faint through the glass, but steady. Micah pointed toward the radio clipped at Curtis's belt. Curtis looked down, then gestured beneath the workbench. It had fallen out of reach. The wind had driven the sliding door shut. Ice now locked the exterior mechanism, while the warped lower track prevented Curtis from lifting the panel free. He had gone into the workshop to retrieve the transfer switch before the cold worsened. He was not unconscious. He had not acted foolishly. He was simply inside a room whose exit had failed. Micah examined the track. The exterior latch could be removed, but the screws were rusted and partly covered by ice. He could also pull the door outward from the bottom. His left hand found the edge. His right shoulder tightened before he applied any force. Micah released the door. A week earlier, he would have pulled anyway. He keyed the radio instead. Curtis located in rear workshop. Conscious, mobile, no reported chest pain or dizziness. Sliding door jammed by ice and track distortion. I need the road crew with the hinge kit. Dana answered immediately. Estimated arrival 7 minutes. Keep verbal contact. Do not strain the door. Curtis heard enough through the window to understand. You could open it, he said. Micah met his eyes through the cleared glass. Probably. Then do it. Not without risking the shoulder. Curtis studied him. For a man like Curtis, admitting a physical limit was not weakness. It was a language he understood too well and used too rarely. He gave a short nod. Maeve took the thermos to the window. Do you have gloves on? Curtis raised both hands. Good. Move away from the door when the crew arrives. I know how doors work. Maeve unscrewed the thermos. Then this morning has been humbling for all of us. Curtis almost smiled. The road crew arrived with a battery impact driver, penetrating oil, and a narrow hydraulic spreader. Micah explained the door mechanism and let the senior worker take position. No one praised him for stepping back. That made the act feel honest. Within 4 minutes, the corroded latch came free. The crew lifted the lower edge just enough to clear the bent track, and the door slid open. Cold air entered the workshop. Curtis walked out under his own power. Aster approached, but stopped several feet away until he said her name. Come here, girl. She crossed the snow and pressed her shoulder briefly against his leg. Curtis placed one hand on her back. I suppose you remembered where I hide. She remembered where you work, Micah said. Curtis looked toward the truck. I'm not going to the church hall. No one said you were, Maeve replied. Dana's voice came through the radio. Nora had been listening. Curtis, she said, we do not need another patient. We need someone at Kestrel House who understands load distribution. Curtis frowned at the radio. What are they running? 2 portable heaters, communications, lights, and a water boiler. On which generator? Maeve named the model. Curtis's expression changed from resistance to professional concern. They cannot run all of that on one circuit. That is why we need you, Nora said. The invitation did not erase his pride. It gave the pride somewhere useful to stand. Curtis retrieved the transfer switch and his line worker's pliers. He locked the workshop as securely as the damaged door allowed and climbed into the truck without being lifted. Aster sat beside him on the rear seat. During the drive back, Curtis kept one hand on the metal case at his feet and the other near Aster's shoulder. He did not speak until Kestrel House came into view. Amos used to bring her by every Thursday. Maeve looked back. You complained every Thursday. I complained because he stayed too long. He said you made coffee. I did not say I wanted him thirsty. At the lodge, Dana met them at the entrance. Curtis refused a chair until he had inspected the backup power system. The staging room was running a communication station, 3 battery chargers, a water boiler, and 2 portable heaters. Laurel had recorded each device, but no one had yet measured the combined draw under full load. Curtis crouched near the distribution panel, then stood again when his knees objected. Turn off the second heater. The room quieted. It is 10 degrees outside, one volunteer said. And it will become colder inside if you trip the breaker and shut down everything. He directed Micah to move the water boiler to a separate circuit, supported by a smaller generator. The radio chargers were staggered instead of running at once. One heater remained in the main room. The second was moved to the rear hall and used intermittently. Curtis did not save the system alone. Laurel provided the equipment list. Dana controlled the changes. Micah moved the lighter connections and explained the generator behavior. Nora recorded the new load schedule. Knowledge passed from one person to another until it no longer belonged to a single pair of hands. The radio continued reporting. West route complete. Henry staying home. Neighbor present. Church transport has Ruth Calder. Simon Trask confirmed. Nephew on site. South Road resident remaining home with wood heat. Each call returned a wooden tag to the board. Aster rested near the rear doorway, facing both the room and the hall, where her puppies slept. She had completed her one short route. Celia removed the leash and examined her paws before allowing her to remain. By late morning, 11 tags hung in place. Curtis's tag remained on Nora's desk. Nora looked at him. Where are you choosing to stay during the outage? Curtis glanced toward the generator panel. Here, until the power is stable. That is a location and a reason, Nora said. I will accept both. She wrote the decision into the log. Then she handed Curtis his own tag. He carried it to the board and placed it in the 12th slot himself. At 12:14, the utility company restored power to the north slope. Lights came on across Kestrel House 1 row at a time. The refrigerator motor started in the kitchen. Somewhere upstairs, an old clock resumed ticking. No one cheered immediately. Dana waited for confirmation that the voltage was stable. Nora contacted the remaining households. The road teams reported their returns. Laurel checked every name against the log. Only when the final pair entered the lodge did Maeve look toward Aster. The shepherd was standing near the brass bell. Maeve's expression softened. She spoke the same words Amos had used at the end of every winter round. Everybody's in, Aster. The dog touched the handle once. The bell rang. Then she touched it again. The second note moved through the lodge, clear and warm, passing over wet boots, open notebooks, empty coffee cups, and the 12 returned tags. Micah looked around the room. No one had been dragged from a home against their will. No one had been left alone because a record was incomplete. No single person had carried the whole morning. The work had been less dramatic than rescue stories like to promise. It had required phone calls, permission, repaired doors, honest limits, and people willing to be useful without becoming central. Perhaps that was why it mattered. Laurel's phone vibrated. She looked at the screen and stepped away from the table. It's the rehabilitation center. The room quieted as she opened the message. A short audio file had been sent by Amos's speech therapist. Laurel pressed play. At first there was only breathing and the faint scrape of a chair. Then Amos Bellamy's voice came through, slow and uneven. Don't wait. For me. A pause followed, long enough that no one moved. Split. The roots. The recording ended. Aster lifted her head at the sound of his voice. Laurel held the phone against her chest. Amos had not given instructions about the lodge, the dogs, or the 12 households. He had said only the thing he had resisted saying for years. The work must continue without passing through him first. Micah looked at the complete route board. The danger had passed. The harder surrender was still ahead. 4 days after the outage, the mountain road to Kestrel House was declared safe for non-essential travel. The afternoon arrived bright and still. Sunlight moved across the snow in long silver bands, and drops of meltwater fell from the lodge roof with the patient rhythm of a clock learning to start again. Aster heard the rehabilitation center's van before anyone else did. She rose from the rug near the rear hall and crossed the dining room without running. Nell and the other 2 puppies woke at once, but Celia kept them behind the low gate with a handful of softened kibble and firm instructions they did not respect for long. Outside, the van stopped near the front steps. Laurel climbed out first. She wore a dark olive coat and carried the leather accordion file that seemed to have become part of her body. A rehabilitation therapist followed, holding a folded walker and watching the icy ground. Amos Bellamy appeared last. He had grown thinner since Micah remembered him. His white hair was combed back neatly, and a short white mustache rested above a mouth that now required effort to shape each word. A forest green cardigan showed beneath his navy overcoat. One hand held a black 4-footed cane. The other rested briefly against the van door while he found his balance. Aster stopped 1 pace away. Her body trembled once, but she did not crowd him. Amos looked down. The effort of smiling changed his whole face. Aster. The name emerged slowly, roughened by recovery, but unmistakable. The shepherd stepped forward and placed her head beneath his open palm. Amos closed his fingers against the fur under her ear. No one spoke. There are reunions that ask to be witnessed loudly. This was not one of them. It needed only the old man's hand, the patient dog, and the quiet mercy of being remembered after one's body had changed. Aster remained there until Amos shifted his cane. Then she stepped aside and waited for him to enter. Inside Kestrel House, the changes were impossible to miss. The winter round board still hung in the dining room, but the route tags now had numbered check-in times beneath them. A second column listed the assigned pair for each trip. Colored cards identified communication preferences, not medical details, only practical agreements made with each resident. One card read, "Call first." Another, "Window signal preferred." A third, "No family contact without permission, unless emergency." A locked cabinet held the spare keys of residents who had signed written consent. Beside it hung a clipboard recording when each key left and when it returned. The brass bell remained on the serving counter. Amos saw the board first. His hand tightened on the cane. Micah recognized the reaction. A man could say he wanted help and still feel wounded when help arrived in a form he had not designed. Laurel guided Amos toward a chair. He refused it. The therapist did not insist. She stood close enough to steady him but allowed him to choose. Amos moved slowly around the room, reading the new labels. His gaze stopped on the empty box marked Backup Coordinator. He looked at Maeve, then Nora, then Micah. Nora stood beside the radio table in a cream mock neck and sage utility vest, her black notebook closed before her. She did not offer an explanation before Amos asked. He attempted to speak, but the first words caught. The therapist handed him a thin communication board. Amos steadied it against the table and wrote with his right hand. "Winter round is my responsibility." Maeve read it once. Her face softened, but her answer did not. "That is why it almost disappeared with you." Laurel lowered her eyes. Amos looked toward her, as though expecting support. She opened the accordion file instead. Maeve continued. "We admire you for remembering every road, every furnace, every person who hated being called before breakfast. We should have asked what would happen when you could not answer the phone. Amos wrote again. I never missed a route. No, Nora said. You missed the handoff. The room became still. Nora did not speak with anger. Anger might have allowed Amos to defend himself. Her calm required him to listen. You helped people, she said. You also decided for some of us. You kept information in your head. You held keys without written consent. You made yourself necessary, then called the necessity service. Pain passed across Amos's face. Aster moved closer, but did not lean against him. She remained near enough to offer presence without interrupting what had to be said. Micah understood that restraint better now. Amos wrote more slowly. I was trying to keep them safe. Nora nodded. I know. That answer seemed to hurt him most. Kindness did not become harmless, merely because it had been sincere. Amos lowered the marker. For several moments, he looked toward the windows, where afternoon light rested across the snow. When he wrote again, the letters were uneven. After Margaret died, people needed me. He stopped, pressing the marker against the board. Then he added, if they did not need me, I did not know why to come back here. Micah looked away. He had heard versions of that confession in silence all his life. A mission ended. A marriage failed. A house became quiet. A man began measuring his worth by how quickly he could solve another person's problem. It was easier to be necessary than to be known. Being necessary required skill. Being known required surrender. Micah rested his left hand on the back of a chair. His right shoulder ached faintly, not enough to stop him, only enough to remind him that strength had boundaries whether a man admitted them or not. Nora stepped closer to Amos. I am not asking you to stop caring, she said. I am asking you to stop making your care impossible to continue without you. Amos closed his eyes. The therapist waited. No one rescued him from the silence. At last, Amos opened the board again. What do I do? Nora did not answer with forgiveness. She answered with work. You turn over every route note so it can be copied and updated. You return the keys that were never formally entrusted to the program. You write to the people whose decisions you made without asking. You accept a second coordinator. And no one goes out alone again. Amos looked at Laurel. She placed a document before him. I also found a way to keep the program operating without using your personal checking account as emergency funding. Laurel explained the plan carefully. Kestrel House would not become a shelter, clinic, or residential care center. For the rest of winter, the dining room and service area would operate only as a dispatch office, equipment store, and volunteer staging point under a temporary insured agreement. Fuel expenses would be recorded. Volunteers would receive mileage reimbursement. A separate account would cover Aster's food and veterinary care. Every assignment would require confirmation that it had been completed. Good intentions are not accounting, Laurel said, but accounting can keep good intentions from collapsing. Amos gave a small sound that might have been a laugh. He took the pen. One by one, he initialed the transfer of route records, the key review, and the temporary operating agreement. He paused longest at the line, authorizing 6 weeks of paid coordination from his own winter reserve fund. Micah watched his hand move across the paper. An apology could be spoken in a minute. This cost Amos money, authority, and the comforting fiction that no one could replace him. That made it honest. When Amos finished, Nora slid a blank sheet toward him. For the personal letters, she said. He nodded. The first name he wrote was hers. Dana arrived near the end of the meeting with a thin employment folder. She placed it in front of Micah. The position was titled Winter Facilities and Route Coordinator. 6 weeks. Defined hours. 2 days off each week. No medical assessment. No unilateral changes to resident plans. No solo route travel. A named backup for every shift. Micah read each line. "I can volunteer when something breaks," he said. Nora did not even look surprised. So could Amos. That is different. It is exactly the same sentence wearing a different coat. Maeve poured coffee into a paper cup. "You both believe accepting money makes the work less honorable." Micah looked at the contract again. Money was not the real problem. A paid position came with limits, hours, accountability, the possibility that another person could cover the work while he rested. Volunteering when needed allowed him to decide when he was needed, how long he stayed, and whether anyone could tell him to stop. It allowed him to remain generous without becoming answerable. Nell escaped the puppy gate at that moment. She crossed the dining room with a strip of towel in her mouth, skidded beneath the table, and wrapped the fabric around Micah's boot. Celia appeared in the hallway. I would like the record to show that she received no authorization. Nell sat on Micah's left foot and began chewing the lace. Micah looked down at her, then at the contract. "What happens after 6 weeks?" Dana answered. "The board reviews the role. You may continue, change duties, or step away. The system remains. The system remains. Not the man." Micah picked up the pen. He signed. Before returning it, he added one handwritten condition beneath the printed rules. The no solo policy applies to everyone, including the coordinator. Dana read it and initialed the line. Especially the coordinator. The weeks that followed did not become perfect. They became organized. Amos's route notes were copied and updated with each resident's consent. Some keys were returned. Others remained in the locked cabinet under new agreements. Nora received a letter from Amos that did not ask her to excuse him. It simply named what he had done and promised what would change. Aster remained legally Amos's dog. While he continued rehabilitation, Laurel, Maeve, and Celia shared her care under a written schedule. Aster accompanied only short routes, and only when the resident welcomed her. The puppies received vaccinations, microchips, and temperament evaluations. One went to a middle-aged couple on a small ranch outside town who had raised 2 German shepherds before. The quieter female went to a retired forest ranger with fenced acreage, strong knees, and no illusions about how much training a young shepherd required. Maeve loved all 3 puppies and adopted none. "Affection is not a housing plan," she said. Nell entered a trial placement with Micah. Celia inspected his apartment, his work schedule, his fencing plan, and the name of the person who would care for Nell if his shoulder required treatment. Nell did not win the decision by sleeping on his boots. Micah earned it by making room for a life that could not depend entirely on him. By the 3rd week, light snow was falling again over Bluebird Ridge. Morning gathered slowly inside Kestrel House. Laurel placed a new expense sheet on the table. Curtis adjusted a generator cable near the service door. Nora checked the radios, while Maeve filled the dark red thermos. Aster approached the brass bell. She touched it once. The note moved softly through the room. Micah put on his olive field vest, collected the East route tag, and started toward the door. Then he stopped. His assigned partner had not arrived. Nora was still completing the radio check. Maeve had not secured the thermos lid. The old part of Micah urged him forward. He knew the road. He knew the residents. He could leave now and save 10 minutes. Nell sat on his boot and took the loose lace between her teeth. Micah looked down. "You have very poor timing." Nell pulled once. Maeve handed him a cup of coffee. "Her timing appears excellent." Micah sat on the lower step. He did not call for anyone to hurry. He did not review the route aloud or stand with his hand on the doorknob. He waited while Nora finished the radio check, while Maeve tightened the thermos lid, and while his partner crossed the parking lot toward the lodge. Outside, snow touched the mountains without hiding them. The bell had once called one man to rise before everyone else and carry what no one knew he was carrying. Now it meant only that the day's work was ready to begin. Together. Micah lifted his coffee and watched Nell settle between his boots. He had once believed responsibility meant being the first person through every door. Grace had taught him something quieter. Sometimes faithfulness meant staying seated until no one had to walk through it alone. Sometimes the most faithful thing we can do is not to carry everything alone, but to make room for others to walk beside us. Micah learned that strength is not always found in going first. Sometimes it is found in waiting, listening, and trusting that God may send help through ordinary people, honest limits, and one small dog who refuses to leave anyone behind. Wherever you are in life, may you have the courage to accept the help you would so freely give to someone else. Please share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe if stories of loyalty, responsibility, and quiet grace have a place in your heart. May God give you peace for the road ahead and faithful companions to walk it with you.